시간이 지나면 슬픔이 줄어들 거라고 생각했거든요. 기억에서도 흐려질 거라고 생각을 했는데 슬픔은 더 커지고 그날의 알고 싶은 진실 때문에 기억은 더 또렷해지고.
October 29th, 2022 is a date that haunts Cho Mi-eun. That's when she and her husband, Jong-chul, lost their son in a tragedy that has many South Koreans asking how a night of celebration took such a deadly turn. Their son, Ji-han, was among more than 150 people killed in a crowd crush in Seoul's popular nightlife district, Itaewon.
Oh my God, oh my God.
This small alley was dangerously overcrowded with people celebrating Halloween, moments before it was the scene of South Korea's worst disaster in nearly a decade.
살릴 수 있었다고.
The victims' families formed a group to push for a wider investigation that would hold police and government officials responsible for failing to account for the size of the crowds. But the campaign has made Cho and Lee the targets of abuse, from right-wing trolls who see their advocacy as an attack on South Korea's conservative government. Now, the tragedy has become yet another flashpoint in Korea's increasingly polarized political sphere. Members of South Korea's ruling party piled on with their own criticism, promoting conspiracy theories that claimed opposition members spread vegetable oil in the Itaewon alley the night of the crowd crush.
일반인들뿐만 아니라 정치인들이 하는 2차 가해는 저희 유가족들의 심장에 대못을 박는 것입니다.
The abuse has followed the victims' families offline as well. They followed mourning families to a public memorial set up in remembrance of the dead, live streaming as they hurled insults at those in attendance.
그 분향소 바로 옆에서 정말 태어나서 처음 듣는 그런 심각한 조롱과 모욕의 단어들을 많이 들었거든요. 뭐 시체팔이 한다, 뭐 정말 바로 영정사진 옆에 있는데
시민들은 댓글에서 온라인에서 무차별적인 공격을 하기 시작했어요. 이태원에 놀러 갔냐? 놀러 간 것도 우리가 너희들을 생각해 줘야 되냐? 뭐 할로윈 축제 간 것이 귀신놀이 파티에 갔는데 그걸 왜 우리가 애도해야 되지? 그리고 시체 팔아서 돈 받으려고 하지? 그런 식으로 저에 대해서 매도하고 제가 어디에 나타나기만 하면 이상한 소리를 가슴에 칼을 꽂듯이 많은 이야기들의 악성 댓글이 올라왔어요.
Political experts in Korea say the backlash from conservative politicians and right-wing personalities online may have its roots in South Korea's last major tragedy. 9 years ago, the Seoul ferry sank off the nation's south coast, killing more than 300 people. Most of the victims were high school students. Investigators determined that mistakes and misconduct by the ferry crew and Coast Guard personnel were factors in the tragedy. The findings turned public grief and outrage into calls for the government to take responsibility for what was widely seen as a botched rescue operation. Large protests took place at the Blue House presidential office. The country's prime minister later resigned. And then President Park Geun-hye saw her public approval ratings sharply decline.
이번 사고에 제대로 대처하지 못한 최종 책임은 대통령인 저에게 있습니다.
The next legislative elections dealt a shocking defeat to the ruling Conservative Party, which lost the parliamentary majority it had held for 16 years. and left President Park unable to advance her agenda. Her Democratic Party opponents have held a majority in South Korea's parliament ever since, and Park was replaced by Moon Jae-in after she was impeached and arrested over a corruption scandal. Conservatives retook the presidency in 2022 with the election of Yoon Song-yeol from the Populist People Power Party. Political experts say the current administration is trying to ensure the Itaewon incident does not have the same political impact as the earlier ferry disaster did. For the victims' families, the politicization of the tragedy has only prolonged their grief. It's been nearly half a year since Lee Ji-han died, but his bedroom remains untouched.
사랑해. 많이 사랑해.
The 24-year-old was a rising K-pop singer and actor.
너무 조그맣다. 지안이 연극하던 때인데 이렇게 등치가 좋으는데 어떡하지?
Cho still listens to her son's old voicemail messages just to hear his voice.
엄마, 생일 축하해.
Cho said her husband has attempted suicide multiple times since they lost their son.
그래서 오나 했더니 새벽에 지안이가 2-3시쯤 올 때쯤에서 나가서 서 있더라고요. 네, 아파트 앞에 입구에서 서서 하염없이 오지도 못하는 지안이를 기다리고 있었어요. 네.
Local media reported that 11 emergency phone calls were made to the police hours before the tragedy struck in Itaewon, warning them that the streets were getting dangerously crowded. But as tens of thousands of people descended into the busy nightlife district, only 137 police officers were assigned to the area. Investigators launched a probe into the incident, and they held dozens of officials responsible, including the district police chief. Some are facing charges of negligence and involuntary manslaughter.
사고 이후에는 각 기관별로 법령 매뉴얼에 따른 인명 구조 및 현장 통제 등이 적절히 이루어져야 했으나 부정확한 상황 판단과 상황 전파 지연, 유관 기관들 간의 협조 부실과 구호 조치 지연 등 기관들의 과실이 중첩되어 다수의 인명 피해를 초래한 것으로 판단하였습니다.
Lawmakers also voted to impeach the country's interior and safety minister, with the Constitutional Court given up to 6 months to rule on the impeachment. But the investigations have largely spared senior officials, and some say the probe failed to dig deep enough. The victims' families, meanwhile, continue to call on authorities to get to the bottom of the Itaewon incident.
이태원 참사로 희생된 아이들의 명예 회복과 유가족들이 온전히 추모만 할 수 있도록 진상규명이 철저히 되고 책임자가 처벌되는 그날이 빨리 와서 저희들 일상으로 돌아갈 수 있도록 도와주십시오.